Welcome everyone. Good to see you all. Back for another reading stream. I might do another reading stream Thursday, even though I have to wake up early the next day. Figure I can get at least a chapter read, possibly Thursday evening, in the Fellowship of the Ring. But for now, it looks like I'm going to be reading 2 chapters tonight because the Bridge of Khazad-dum chapter is on the short side. So we'll be, making our way through Moria to the bridge and heading on our way to LOTR. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, making our way to the bridge and encountering what is known, or also known, as Durin's Bane. So, good to see everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you enjoy listening to the live reading. If you're listening to the replay, I hope you enjoy listening to the replay. So without further ado, here it is. The company of the Ring stood silent beside the tomb of Balin. Frodo thought of Bilbo and his long friendship with the dwarf, and of Balin's visit to the Shire long ago. In a dusty chamber in the mountains it seemed 1,000 years ago, and on the other side of the world. At length they stirred and looked up, and began to search for anything that would give them tidings of Balin's fate, or show what had become of his folk. There was another smaller door on the other side of the chamber, under the shaft. By both the doors they could now see that many bones were lying, and among them were broken swords and axe heads, and cloven shields and helms. Some of the swords were crooked, orc scimitars with blackened blades. There were many recesses cut in the rock of the walls, and in them were large iron-bound chests of wood. All had been broken and plundered. Beside the shattered lid of one there lay the remains of a book. It had been slashed and stabbed and partly burned, and it was so stained with black and other dark marks that, like old blood, that little of it could be read. Gandalf lifted it carefully, but the leaves cracked and broke as he laid it on the slab. He pored over it for some time without speaking. Frodo and Gimli, standing at his side, could see, as he gingerly turned the leaves, that they were written by many different hands, in runes both of Moria and of Dale, and here and there in Elvish script. At last Gandalf looked up. "It seems to be a record of the fortunes of Balin's folk," he said. "I guess that it began with their coming to Dimril Dale, nigh on 30 years ago. The pages seem to have numbers referring to the years after their arrival. The top page is marked 1 to 3, so at least 2 are missing from the beginning. Listen to this. We drove out orcs from the great gate and guard. I think the next word is blurred and burned, probably room. We slew many in the bright, I think sun in the dale. Floy was killed by an arrow. He slew the great. Then there is a blurb followed by Floy under grass near Muir of Mere. The next line or two I cannot read. Then comes we have taken the 21st Hall of North End to dwell in. There is, I cannot read what, a shaft is mentioned. Then Balin has set up his seat in the chamber of the Mazarbul. The chamber of records, said Gimli. I guess that is where we now stand. Well, I can read no more for a long way, said Gandalf, except the word gold, and Durin's axe, and something helm. And Balin is now Lord of Moria. That seems to end a chapter. After some stars, another hand begins, and I can see we found true silver, and later the word well forged, and then something, I have it, Mithril. And the last 2 lines, owing to seek for the upper armories of Third Deep, something go westwards, of Blur to Holland's Gate. Gandalf paused and set a few leaves aside. There are several pages of the same sort, rather hastily written and much damaged, he said, but I can make little of them in this light. Now there must be a number of leaves missing, because they begin to be numbered 5, the 5th year of the colony, I suppose. Let me see. No, they are too cut and stained. I cannot read them. We might do better in the sunlight. Wait, here's something. A large, bold hand using an Elvish script. That would be Ori's hand, said Gimli, looking over the wizard's arm. He could read well and speedily, and often used the Elvish characters. I fear he had ill tidings to record in a fair hand, said Gandalf. The first clear word is sorrow, but the rest of the line is lost, unless it ends in Estre. Yes, it must be Yestre, followed by the day being the 10th of November, Balin. I should say yes, make it Yester. Sorry. Balin, Lord of Moria, fell in Dimril Dale. He went alone to look in the mirror. An orc shot him from behind a stone. We slew the orc, but many more, up from east up the Silver Lode. The remainder of the page is so blurred that I cannot make anything out. But I think I can read we have barred the gates, and then can hold them off can hold him long if, and then perhaps horrible and suffer. Poor Balin. He seems to have kept the title that he took for less than 5 years. I wonder what happened afterwards. But there's no time to puzzle out the last few pages. Here's the last page of all. He paused and sighed. Welcome, everyone. It is grim reading, he said. I fear their end was cruel. Listen. We cannot get out. We cannot get out. They have taken the bridge in Second Hall. Farrar and Loney and Nolly fell there. Then there are 4 lines smeared so that I can only read went 5 days ago. The last lines run, the pool is up to the wall at West Gate. The watcher in the water took Oin. We cannot get out. The end comes and then drums in the deep. I wonder what that means. The last thing written is a trailing scroll of elf letters. They are coming. There is nothing more. Gandalf paused and stood in a silent thought. A sudden dread and the horror of the chamber fell on the company. We cannot get out, muttered Gimli. It was well for us that the pool had sunk a little and that the watcher was sleeping down at the southern end. Gandalf raised his head and looked around. They seemed to have made a last stand by both doors, he said, but there were not many left by that time. So ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was valiant but foolish. The time is not come yet. Now I fear we may say farewell to Balin, son of Fundin. Here he must lie in the halls of his fathers. We will take this book, the book of Mazarbul, and look at it more closely later. You had better keep it, Gimli, and take it back to Dane, if you get a chance. It will interest him, but it will grieve him deeply. Come, let us go. The morning is passing. Which way shall we go? Asked Boromir. Back to the hall, answered Gandalf. But our visit to this room has not been in vain. I now know where we are. This must be, as Gimli says, the chamber of Mazarbul, and the hall must be the 21st of the north end. Therefore, we should leave by the eastern arch of the hall, and bear right and south, and go downwards. The 21st hall should be on the 7th level, that is 6 above the level of the gates. Come now, back to the hall. Gandalf had hardly spoken these words when there came a great noise, a rolling boom that seemed to come from depths far below, and to tremble in the stone at their feet. They sprang towards the door in alarm. Doom, doom, it rolled again, as if huge hands were turning the very caverns of Moria into a vast drum. Then there came an echoing blast. A great horn was blown in the hall, and answering horns and harsh cries were heard further off. There was a hurrying sound of many feet. They are coming, cried Legolas. We cannot get out, said Gimli. Trapped, cried Gandalf. Why did I delay? Here we are caught just as they were before, but I was not here then. We will see what... Doom, doom, came the drumbeat, and the walls shook. Slam the doors and wedge them, shouted Aragorn, and keep your packs on as long as you can. We may get a chance to cut our way out yet. No, said Gandalf, we must not get shut in. Keep the east door ajar. We will go that way if we get a chance. Another harsh horn call and shrill cries rang out. Feet were coming down the corridor. There was a ring and clatter as the company drew their swords. Glamdring shone with the pale light, and Sting glinted at the edges. Boromir set his shoulder against the western door. Wait a moment, do not close it yet, said Gandalf. He sprang forward to Boromir's side and drew himself up to his full height. Who comes hither to disturb the rest of Balin, Lord of Moria? He cried in a loud voice. There was a rush of hoarse laughter, like the fall of sliding stones into a pit. Amid the clamor, a deep voice was raised in command. Doom, boom, doom, went the drums in the deep. With a quick movement, Gandalf stepped before the narrow opening of the door and thrust forward his staff. There was a dazzling flash that lit the chamber and the passage outside. For an instant, the wizard looked out. Arrows whined and whistled down the corridor as he sprang back. There are orcs, very many of them, he said, and some are large and evil, black orcs of Mordor. For the moment they are hanging back, but there is something else there. A great cave troll, I think, or more than one. There is no hope of escape that way. And no hope at all if they come at the other door as well, said Boromir. There is no sound outside here yet, said Aragorn, who was standing by the eastern door listening. The passage on this side plunges straight down the stair. It plainly does not lead back towards the hall. But it is no good flying blindly this way with the pursuit just behind. We cannot block the door. Its key is gone and the lock is broken, and it opens inwards. We must do something to delay the enemy first. We will make them fear the chamber of Mazarbul, he said grimly, feeling the edge of his sword on Durin. Heavy feet were heard in the corridor. Boromir flung himself against the door and heaved it to, and he wedged it with the broken sword blades and splinters of wood. The company retreated to the other side of the chamber, but they had no chance to fly yet. There was a blow on the door that made it quiver, and then it began to grind slowly open, driving back the wedges. A huge arm and shoulder with a dark skin of greenish scales was thrust through the widening gap. Then a great flat toeless foot was forced through below. There was a dead silence outside. Boromir leaped forward and hewed at the arm with all his might, but his sword rang, glanced aside, and fell from a shaken hand. The blade was notched. Suddenly, and to his own surprise, Frodo felt a hot wrath blaze up in his heart. "The Shire!" he cried, and springing beside Boromir, he stooped, stabbed with Sting at the hideous foot. There was a bellow, and the foot jerked back, nearly wrenching Sting from Frodo's arm. Black drops dripped from the blade and smoked on the floor. Boromir hurled himself against the door and slammed it again. "One for the Shire!" cried Aragorn. "The Hobbit's bite is deep. You have a good blade, Frodo, son of Drogo." There was a crash on the door, followed by a crash after crash. Rams and hammers were beating against it. It cracked and staggered back, and the opening grew suddenly wide. Arrows came whistling in, but struck the northern wall and fell harmlessly to the floor. There was a horn blast and a rush of feet, and orcs, one after another, leaped into the chamber. How many there were, the company could not count. The affray was sharp, but the orcs were dismayed by the fierceness of the defense. Legolas shot two through the throat. Gimli hewed the legs from under another that had sprung up on Balin's tomb. Boromir and Aragorn slew many. When 13 had fallen, the rest fled shrieking, leaving the defenders unharmed, except for Sam, who had scratched along the scalp. A quick duck had saved him, and he had felled his orc, a sturdy thrust with his barrow blade. A fire was smoldering in his brown eyes that would have made Ted Sandyman step backwards as if he had seen it. "Now is the time," cried Gandalf. "Let us go before the troll returns." But even as they retreated, and before Pippin and Merry had reached their stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. Behind him, his followers clustered in the doorway. His broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a great spear. With the thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backwards, throwing him to the ground. Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, Anduril came down upon his helm. There was a flash, like flame, and the helmet burst asunder. The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled howling, as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. "Doom, doom," went the drums in the deep. The great voice rolled out again. "Now," shouted Gandalf, "now is the last chance. Run for it." Aragorn picked up Frodo where he lay by the wall and made for the stair, pushing Merry and Pippin in front of him. The others followed, but Gimli had to be dragged away by Legolas. In spite of the peril, he lingered by Balin's tomb with his head bowed. Boromir hauled the eastern door to, grinding upon its hinges. It had great iron rings on either side, but could not be fastened. "I am all right," gasped Frodo. "I can walk. Put me down." Aragorn nearly dropped him in his amazement. "I thought you were dead," he cried. "Not yet," said Gandalf, "but there is no time for wonder. Off you go, all of you, down the stairs. Wait a few minutes for me at the bottom, but if I do not come soon, go on. Go quickly and choose paths leading right and downwards." "We cannot leave you to hold the door alone," said Aragorn. "Do as I say," Gandalf fiercely. "Swords are no more use here. Go." Welcome, everyone. The passage was lit by no shaft, and it was utterly dark. They groped their way down a long flight of steps and then looked back, but they could see nothing, except high above them the faint glimmer of this wizard's staff. He seemed to be still standing on guard by the closed door. Frodo breathed heavily and leaned against Sam. He put his arms about him. They stood peering up the stairs into the darkness. Frodo thought he could hear the voice of Gandalf above, muttering words that ran down the sloping roof with a sighing echo. He could not catch what was said. The walls seemed to be trembling. Every now and again, the drumbeats throbbed and rolled. Doom, doom. Suddenly, at the top of the stair, there was a stab of white light. Then there was a dull rumble and a heavy thud. The drumbeats broke out wildly. Doom, boom, and then stopped. Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell to the ground in the midst of the company. "Well, well, that's over," said the wizard, struggling to his feet. "I have done all that I could, but I have met my match and have nearly been destroyed. But don't stand here. Go on. You will have to do without light for a while. I am rather shaken. Go on, go on. Where are you, Gimli? Come ahead with me. Keep close behind, all of you." Welcome, everyone. They stumbled after him, wondering what had happened. Doom, doom, went the drum beats again. They now sounded muffled and far away, but they were following. There was no other sound of pursuit, neither tramp of feet nor any voice. Gandalf took no turns, right or left, for the passage seemed to be going in the direction that he desired. Every now and again, it descended a flight of steps 50 or more to a lower level. At the moment, there was a chief danger, for in the dark they could not see a descent until they came on it, and put their feet out into emptiness. Gandalf felt the ground with the staff like a blind man. At the end of an hour, they had gone a mile, or maybe a little more, and had descended many flights of stairs. There was still no sound of pursuit. Almost they began to hope that they would escape. At the bottom of the 7th flight, Gandalf halted. "It is getting hot," he gasped. "We ought to be down at least to the level of the gates now. Soon I think we should look for a left-hand turn to take us east. I hope it is not far. I am very weary. I must rest for a moment, even if all the orcs ever spawned are after us." Gandalf took his arm and helped him down on the seat. Helped him down to a seat on the step. "What happened away up there at the door?" he asked. "Did you meet the beater of the drums?" "I do not know," answered Gandalf, "but I found myself suddenly faced by something that I have not met before. I could think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. I know many, but to do things of that kind rightly requires time, and even then the door cannot be broken by strength." As I stood there, I could hear orc voices on the other side. At any moment, I thought they would burst it open. I could not hear what was said. They seemed to be talking in their own hideous language. All I caught was "gash," that is, fire, and something came into the chamber. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. I laid hold of the iron ring, and then it preceded me and my spell. What it was I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. The counterspell was terrible. It nearly broke me. For an instant, the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved to be a great strain. The door burst in pieces. Something dark as a cloud was blocking out all the light inside, and I was thrown backwards down the stairs. All the walls gave way, and the roof of the chamber as well, I think. I'm afraid Balin is buried deep, and maybe something else is buried there too. I cannot say, but at least the passage behind us was completely blocked. I have never felt so spent, but it is passing. And now what about you, Frodo? There was not time to say so, but I have never been more delighted in my life than when you spoke. I feared that it was a brave but dead hobbit that Aragorn was carrying. What about me? Said Frodo. I am alive and whole, I think. I am bruised and in pain, but it is not too bad. Well, said Aragorn, I can only say that hobbits are made of stuff so tough that I have never met the like of it. Had I known, I would have spoken softer than the inn had breathed. The spear thrust would have skewered a wild boar. Well, it did not skewer me, I'm glad to say, said Frodo, though I feel as I had been caught between a hammer and an anvil. He said no more. He found breathing painful. You take after Bilbo, said Gandalf. There is more about you than meets the eye, as I said of him long ago. Frodo wondered if the remark meant more than it said. He now went on again. Before long, Gimli spoke. He had keen eyes in the dark. I think, he said, there is a light ahead. But it is not daylight. It is red. What can it be? Gash, muttered Gandalf. I wonder if that is what they meant, that the lower levels are on fire. So it can only go on. Soon the light became unmistakable. It could be seen by all. It was flickering and glowing on the walls away down the passage before them. They could now see their way. In front the road sloped down swiftly, and some way ahead there stood a long archway. Through it the growing light came. The air became very hot. When they came to the arch, Gandalf went through, signing to them to wait. As he stood just beyond the opening, they saw his face lit by a red glow. Quickly he stepped back. There is some new devilry here, he said, devised for our welcome, no doubt. But I know now where we are. We have reached the first deep, the level immediately below the gates. This is the second hall of the old Moria, and the gates are near, away beyond the eastern end on the left, not more than a quarter of a mile. Across the bridge, up a broad stair, along a wide road, through the first hall and out. But come and look. They peered out. Before them was another cavernous hall. It was loftier and far longer than the one in which they had slept. They were near its eastern end. Westward it ran away into darkness. Down the center stalked a double line of towering pillars. They were carved like boles of mighty trees, whose boughs upheld the roof with a branching tracery of stone. Their stems were smooth and black, but a red glow was darkly mirrored in their sides. Right across the floor, close to the feet of two huge pillars, a great fissure had opened. Out of it a fierce red light came, and now and again flames licked at the brink and curled about the bases of the columns. Wisps of dark smoke wavered in the hot air. If we had come by the main road down from the upper halls, we should have been trapped here, said Gandalf. Let us hope that the fire now lies between us and pursuit. Come, there is no time to lose. Even as he spoke, they heard again the pursuing drumbeat. Doom, doom, doom. Away beyond the shadows at the western end of the hall, there came cries and horn calls. Doom, doom. The pillars seemed to tremble and the flames to quiver. Now for the last race, said Gandalf. If the sun is shining outside, we may still escape. After me. They turned left and sped across the smooth floor of the hall. The distance was greater than it had looked. As they ran, they heard the beaten echo of many hurrying feet behind. A shrill yell went up. They had been seen. There was a ring and clash of steel. An arrow whistled over Frodo's head. Boromir laughed. They did not expect this, he said. The fire has cut them off. We are on the wrong side. Look ahead, said Gandalf. Called Gandalf. The bridge is near. It is dangerous and narrow. Suddenly Frodo saw before him a black chasm. At the end of the hall, the floor vanished and fell to an unknown depth. The outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone, without curb or rail, that spanned the chasm with one curving spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defense of the dwarves against any enemy that might capture the first hall and outer passages. They could only pass across it in single file. At the brink, Gandalf halted, and the others came up in the pack behind. Lead the way, Gimli, he said. Pippin and Merry next. Straight on, and up the stair beyond the door. Arrows fell among them. One struck Frodo and sprang back. Another pierced Gandalf's hat and stuck there like a black feather. Frodo looked behind. Beyond the fire, he saw swarming black figures. There seemed to be hundreds of orcs. They brandished spears and scimitars, which shone red as blood in the firelight. Doom, doom, rolled the drum beats, growing louder and louder. Doom, doom. Legolas turned and set an arrow to the string. There was a long shot for a small bow. He drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. Two great trolls appeared. They bore great slabs of stone and flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror. The ranks of the orcs had opened, and they crowded away, as if they themselves were afraid. Something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow in the middle of which was a dark form, of man's shape maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then with a rush it leapt across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled, and a blaze behind it. In its right hand was a blade like a stabbing tongue of fire, and in its left it held a whip of many thongs. Aye, wailed Legolas. A Balrog has come. Gimli stared with his wide eyes. Durin's Bane, he cried, letting his axe fall. He covered his face. A Balrog, muttered Gandalf. Now I understand. He faltered and leaned heavily on the staff. What an evil fortune, and I am already weary. The dark figure streamed with the fire, raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways, and Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed, like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. Over the bridge, cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. Fly, this is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly! Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground, side by side, behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end, and turned unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand, but in the other hand Glamdring gleamed, and cold and white. His enemy halted again. Facing him in the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. You cannot pass, he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It set forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, gray and bent like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow, a red sword leaped flaming. The Lamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and his sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. "You cannot pass," he cried. He said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil," he shouted, "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor," cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment, Gandalf lifted his staff and cried aloud. He smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained, poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip. And the thongs lashed and curled around the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools," he cried, and was gone. The fires went out, and blank darkness fell. The company stood rooted with horror, staring into the pit. Even as Aragorn and Boromir came flying back, the rest of the bridge cracked and fell. At the cry, Aragorn roused them. "Come, I will lead you now," he called. "You must obey his last command. Follow me." They stumbled wildly up the great stairs beyond the door, Aragorn leading, Boromir at the rear. At the top was a wide, echoing passage. Along this they fled. Frodo heard Sam at his side weeping, and then he found that he himself was weeping as he ran. Doom, 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 the drumbeats rolled behind, mournful now and slow doom. They ran on. The light grew before them. Great shafts pierced the roof. They ran swifter. They passed into a hall, bright with daylight, from its high windows in the east. They fled across it. Through its huge broken doors they passed, and suddenly before them the great gates opened in an arch of blazing light. There was a guard of orcs crouching in the shadows behind the great doorposts, towering on either side, but the gates were shattered and cast down. Aragorn smote to the ground the captain that stood in his path, and the rest fled in terror of his wrath. The company swept past them and took no heed of them. Out of the gates they ran, and sprang down the huge and age-worn steps to the threshold of Moria. Thus at last they came beyond hope under the sky and felt wind on their faces. They did not halt until they were out of bowshot from the walls. Dimrill Dale lay about them. The shadow of the misty mountains lay upon it. But eastwards there was a golden light on the land. It was but 1 hour after noon. The sun was shining, the clouds were white and high. They looked back. Dark yawned the archway of the gates under the mountain shadow. Faint and far beneath the earth rolled the slow drumbeats, doom. A thin black smoke trailed out. Nothing else was to be seen. The dale all around was empty. Doom. Grief at the last wholly overcame them, and they wept long, some standing in silence, some cast upon the ground. Doom, doom. The drum beats faded. And take a little break to take a drink, and that is the bridge of Khazad-dum. Thank you again, everyone, for hanging out. On to Chapter 6. Lothlorien. "Alas, I fear we cannot stay here longer," said Aragorn. He looked towards the mountains and held up his sword. "Farewell, Gandalf," he cried. "Did I not say to you, if you pass the doors of Moria, beware? Alas, that I spoke true. What hope have we without you?" He turned to the company. "We must do without hope," he said. "At least we may yet be avenged. Let us gird ourselves and weep no more. Come, we have a long road and much to do." They rose and looked about them. Northward of the dale ran up into a glen of shadows between two great arms of the mountains, above which 3 white peaks were shining. Calabdil, Fanwidul, Caradhras, the mountains of Moria. At the head of the glen, a torrent flowed like a white lace over an endless ladder of short falls, and a mist of foam hung in the air about the mountain's feet. "Yonder is the Dimrill Stair," said Aragorn, pointing to the falls. "Down the deep cloven way that climbs beside the torrent we should have come, if fortune had been kinder. Or Caradhras less cruel," said Gimli. "There he stands smiling in the sun. He shook his fist at the furthest of the snow-capped peaks and turned away. To the east, the outflung arm of the mountains marched to a sudden end, and far lands could be described beyond them, wide and vague. To the south, the misty mountains receded endlessly as far as sight could reach. Less than a mile away, and a little below them, for they still stood high up on the west side of the dale, there lay a mere. It was long and oval, shaped like a great spearhead thrust deep into the northern glen, but its southern end was beyond the shadows under the sunlit sky. Yet its waters were dark, a deep blue, like clear evening sky seen from a lamplit room. Its face was still and unruffled. Above it, or about it, lay a smooth sward, shelving down on all sides to its bare, unbroken rim. There lies the mirror. Deep Khazad-dum, said Gimli sadly. I remember that he said, May you have joy of the sight, but we cannot linger here. Now long shall I journey ere I have joy again. It is I that must hasten away, and he that must remain. The company now went down the road from the gates. It was rough and broken, fading to a winding track between heather and wind that thrust amid the cracking stones. But still it could be seen that once long ago a great paved way had wound upwards from the lowlands to the dwarf kingdom. In places there were ruined works of stone beside the path, and mounds of green tops with slender birches, or fir trees, sighing in the wind. An eastward bend led them hard by the sword of Mirror, and there not far from the roadside stood a single column broken at the top. That is Durin's stone, said Gimli. I cannot pass without turning aside for a moment to look at the wonder of the dale. Be swift then, said Aragorn, looking back towards the gates. The sun sinks early. The orcs will not, maybe, come out till after dark, but we must be far away before nightfall. The moon is almost spent. It will be dark tonight. Come with me, Frodo, cried the dwarf, springing from the road. I would not have you go without seeing Khazad-dum. He ran down the long green slope. Frodo followed slowly, drawn by the still blue water in spite of hurt and weariness. Sam came up behind. Beside the standing stone, Gimli halted and looked up. It was cracked and weather-worn, and the faint runes upon its side could not be read. The pillar marks the spot where Durin first looked in the mirror, said the dwarf. Let us look ourselves once, ere we go. Sorry. They stooped over the dark water. At first they could see nothing. Then slowly they saw the forms of the encircling mountains mirrored in a profound blue, and the peaks were like plumes of white flame. Above them, beyond, there was a space of sky. There, like jewels sunk in the deep, shone glinting stars, though sunlight was in the sky above. Of their own stooping forms, no shadow could be seen. O Khazad-dum, fair and wonderful, said Gimli, there lies the crown of Durin till he wakes. Farewell. He bowed and turned away, and hastened back to the greensward to the road again. What did you see? Said Pippin to Sam, but Sam was too deep in thought to answer. The road now turned south and went quickly downwards, running out from between the arms of the dale. Some way below the mirror they came on a deep well of water, clear as crystal, from which a freshet fell over a stone lip, and ran glistening and gurgling down the steepy rock channel. Here is a spring from which the silver lode rises, said Gimli. Do not drink of it. It is icy cold. Soon it becomes a swift river, and it gathers water from many other mountain streams, said Aragorn. Our road leads beside it for many miles, for I shall take you by the road that Gandalf chose, and first I hope to come to the woods where the silver lode flows into the great river, out yonder. They looked as he pointed, and before them they could see the stream leaping down to the trough of the valley, and then running on and away into the lower lands, until it was lost in a golden haze. There lie the woods of Lothlorien, said Legolas. That is the fairest of all the dwellings of my people. There are no trees like the trees of that land, for in the autumn their leaves fall not, but turn to gold. Not till the spring comes and the new green opens do they fall, and then the boughs are laden with yellow flowers, and the floor of the wood is golden, and golden is the roof, and its pillars are of silver, for the bark of the trees is smooth and gray. So still our songs in Mirkwood say, my heart would be glad if I were beneath the eaves of that wood, and it were springtime. My heart would be glad even in the winter, said Aragorn, but it lies many miles away. Let us hasten. For some time, Frodo and Sam managed to keep up with the others, but Aragorn was leading them at a great pace, and after a while they lagged behind. They had eaten nothing since the early morning. Sam's cut was burning like fire, and his head was felt light. In spite of the shining sun, the wind seemed chill after the warm darkness of Moria. He shivered. Frodo felt every step more painful and he gasped for breath. At last Legolas turned, and seeing them now far behind, he spoke to Aragorn. The others halted, and Aragorn ran back, calling to Boromir to come with them. "I am sorry, Frodo," he cried, full of concern. "So much has happened this day, and we have much need of haste, that I have forgotten that you were hurt. And Sam, too. You should have spoken. We have done nothing to ease you, as we ought, though all the orcs of Moria were after us. Come now, a little further out on there is a place where we can rest for a little. There I will do what I can for you. Come, Boromir, we will carry them." Soon afterwards they came upon another stream that ran down from the west, and joined its bubbling water with a hurrying silver load. Together they plunged over a fall of green-hued stone, and foamed down into a dell. About it stood fir trees, short and bent, and its sides were steeped in cloths with hart's tongue and shrubs of whortleberry. At the bottom there was a level space, through which the stream flowed noisily over shining pebbles. Here they rested. It was now nearly 3 hours after noon, and they came only a few miles from the gates. Already the sun was westering. While Gimli and the two younger hobbits kindled a fire of brush and fir wood, and drew water, Aragorn tended Sam and Frodo. Sam's wound was not deep, but it looked ugly, and Aragorn's face was grave as he examined it. After a moment he looked up with relief. "Good luck, Sam," he said. "Many have received worse than this in payment for the slaying of their first orc. The cut is not poisoned, as the wounds of orc blades too often are. It should heal well when I have tended it. Bathe it when Gimli has heated water." He opened his pouch and drew out some withered leaves. "They are dry, and some of their virtue has gone," he said. "But here I have still some of the leaves of Ethlas that I gathered near Weathertop. Crush one in the water, and wash the wound clean, and I will bind it. Now is your turn, Frodo." "I am all right," said Frodo, reluctant to have his garments touched. All I needed was some food and a little rest." "No," said Aragorn. "We must have a look and see what hammer and the anvil we must see what the hammer and the anvil have done to you. I still marvel that you were alive at all." Gently he stripped off Frodo's old jacket and worn tunic, and gave a gasp of wonder. Then he laughed. The silver corselet shimmered before his eyes like the light upon a rippling sea. Carefully he took it off and held it up, and the gems of it glittered like stars, and the sound of the shaken rings was like the tinkle of rain in a pool. "Look, my friends," he called. "Here's a pretty hobbit skin to wrap an elven princeling in. If it were known that hobbits had such hides, all the hunters of Middle-earth would be riding to the Shire. And all the arrows of all the hunters in the world would be in vain," said Gimli, gazing at the mail in wonder. "It is a mithril coat. Mithril! I have never seen or heard tell of one so fair. Is this the coat that Gandalf spoke of? That he undervalued it? Then he undervalued it, but it was well given." "I have often wondered what you and Bilbo were doing, so close in this little room," said Merry. "Bless the old hobbit. I love him more than ever. I hope we get a chance of telling him about it." There was a dark and blackened bruise on Frodo's right side and breast. Under the mail there was a shirt of soft leather, but at one point the rings had been driven through into the flesh. Frodo's left side was also scored and bruised where he had been hurled against the wall. While the others set the food ready, Aragorn bathed the hurts with water in which Ethlas was steeped. The pungent fragrance filled the dell, and all those who stooped over the steaming water felt refreshed and strengthened. Soon Frodo felt the pain leave him, and his breath grew easy, though he was stiff and sore to the touch for many days. Aragorn bound some soft pads of cloth at his side. "The mail is marvelously light," he said. "Put it on again if you can bear it. My heart is glad to know that you have such a coat. Do not lay it aside, even in sleep, unless fortune brings you where you are safe for a while, and that will seldom chance while your quest lasts." When they had eaten, the company got ready to go on. They put out the fire and hid all traces of it. Then, climbing out of the dell, they took to the road again. They had not gone far before the sun sank behind the westward heights, and great shadows crept down the mountainsides. Dusk veiled their feet, and mist rose in the hollows. Away in the east, the evening light lay pale upon the dim lands of distant plain and wood. Sam and Frodo, now feeling eased and greatly refreshed, were able to go at a fair pace. And with only one brief halt, Aragorn led the company on for nearly 3 more hours. It was dark. Deep night had fallen. There were many clear stars, but the fast waning moon would not be seen until late. Gimli and Frodo were at the rear, walking softly and not speaking, listening for any sound upon the road behind. At length Gimli broke the silence. "Not a sound but the wind," he said. "There are no goblins near, or my ears are made of wood. It is to be hoped that the orcs will be content with driving us from Moria. And maybe that was all their purpose, and they had nothing else to do with us, with the ring. Though orcs will often pursue foes for many leagues into the plain, if they have fallen captain to avenge." Sorry. Frodo did not answer. He looked at Sting, and the blade was dull. Yet he heard something, or thought he had. As soon as the shadows had fallen about them, and the road behind was dim, he had heard again the quick patter of feet. Even now he heard it. He turned swiftly. There were two tiny gleams of light behind, or for a moment he thought he saw them, but at once they slipped aside and vanished. "What is it?" said the dwarf. "I don't know," answered Frodo. "I thought I heard feet, and I thought I saw a light, like eyes. I have thought so often since we first entered Moria." Gimli halted and stooped to the ground. "I hear nothing but this night speech of plant and stone," he said. "Come, let us hurry. The others are out of sight." The night wind blew chill up the valley to meet them. Before them, a wide gray shadow loomed, and they heard an endless rustle of leaves like poplars in the breeze. "Lothlorien," cried Legolas. "Lothlorien, we have come to the eaves of the Golden Wood. Alas, that it is winter." Under the night, the trees stood tall before them, arched over the road and stream that ran suddenly beneath their spreading boughs. In the dim light of the stars, their stems were gray, and their quivering leaves of hints of fallow gold. "Lothlorien," said Aragorn, "glad I am to hear again the wind in the trees. We are still a little more than 5 leagues from the gates, but we can go no further. Here let us hope that the virtue of the elves will keep us tonight from the peril that comes from behind." "If the elves indeed still dwell here in the darkening world," said Gimli. "It is long since any of my own folk journeyed hither back to the land whence we wandered in ages long ago," said Legolas. "But we hear that Lorien is not yet deserted, for there is a secret power here that holds evil from the land. Nevertheless, its folk are seldom seen, and maybe they dwell now deep in the woods and far from the northern border." "Indeed, deep in the wood they dwell," said Aragorn, and sighed as if some memory stirred in him. "We must fend for ourselves tonight. We will go forward a short way until the trees are all about us, and then we will turn aside from the path and seek a place to rest in." He stepped forward, but Boromir stood irresolute and did not follow. "Is there no other way?" he said. "What other fairer way would you desire?" said Aragorn. "A plain road, though it led through a hedge of swords," said Boromir. "By strange paths has this company been led, and so far to evil fortune. Against my will we passed under the shades of Moria, to our loss. And now we must enter the Golden Wood, you say. But of that perilous land we have heard in Gondor, it is said that few come out who once go in, and that of that few none have escaped unscathed." "Say not unscathed, but if you say unchanged, then maybe you will speak the truth," said Aragorn. "But lore wanes in Gondor, Boromir, if in the city of those who once were wise they now speak evil of Lothlorien. Believe what you will. There is no other way for us, unless you would go back to Moria Gate, or scale the pathless mountains, or swim the great river of all alone." "Then lead on," said Boromir, "but it is perilous." "Perilous indeed," said Aragorn, "fair and perilous, but only evil need fear it, or those who bring some evil with them. Follow me." They had gone little more than a mile into the forest when they came upon another stream flowing down swiftly from the tree-clad slopes that climbed back westward toward the mountains. They heard it splashing over a fall away among the shadows on the right. Its dark hurrying waters ran across the path before them and joined the silver lode in a swirl of dim pools among the roots of the trees. "Here is Nimrodel," said Legolas. "Of this stream the Sylvan elves made many songs long ago, and still we sing them in the north, remembering the rainbow on its falls and the golden flowers that floated in its foam. All is dark now, and the bridge of Nimrodel is broken down. I will bathe my feet, for it is said that the water is healing to the weary." He went forward and climbed down to the deep cloven bank and stepped into the stream. "Follow me," he cried. "The water is not deep. Let us wade across. On the further bank we can rest, and the sound of falling water may bring us sleep and forgetfulness of grief." One by one they climbed down and followed Legolas. For a moment Frodo stood near the brink and let the water flow over his tired feet. It was cold, but its touch was clean, and as he went on and it mounted to his knees, he felt that the stain of travel and all weariness were washed from his limbs. When all the company had crossed, they sat and rested and ate a little food, and Legolas told them tales of Lothlorien that the elves of Mirkwood still kept in their hearts, of sunlight and starlight upon the meadows by the great river before the world was gray, At length the silence fell, and they heard the music of the waterfall running sweetly into the shadows. Almost Frodo fancied that he could hear a voice singing, mingled with the sound of the water. "Do you hear the voice of Nimrodel?" asked Legolas. I will sing you a song of the maiden Nimrodel, who bore the same name as the stream beside, but she lived long ago. It is a fair song in our woodland tongue, but this is how it runs in the western speech. I summon Rivendell now sing it. In a soft voice hardly to be heard amid the rustle of the leaves above them, he began. An elven maiden there was of old, a shining star by day. Her mantle of white was hemmed with gold, her shoes of silver gray. A star was bound upon her brows, a light was on her hair. I sat upon the golden boughs, and Lorien the fair. Her hair was long, her limbs were white, and fair she was and free, and in the wind she went as light as leaf of linden tree. Beside the falls of Nimrodel, by water clear and cool, her voice of falling silver fell into the shining pool. Where now she wanders none can tell, in sunlight or in shade, for lost of yore was Nimrodel, and in the mountains strayed. The elven ship in haven gray, beneath the mountain lee, awaited her for many a day, beside the roaring sea. A wind by night in northern lands arose and loud it cried, and drove the ship from elven strands across the streaming tide. When dawn came dim, the land was lost, the mountains sinking gray. Beyond the heaving waves that tossed their plumes of blinding spray, Amroth beheld the shining shore, now lay low beyond the swell, and cursed the faithless ship that bore him far from Nimrodel. Of old he was an elven king, a lord of tree and glen, when golden were the boughs and spring, and fair Lothlorien. From helm to sea they saw him leap, as arrow from the string, and dive into the water deep, as mew upon the wing. The wind was in his flowing hair, the foam about him shone. Afar they saw him, strong and fair, go riding like a swan. But from the west has come no word, and on the hither shore no tidings elven folk have heard of Amroth evermore. The voice of Legolas faltered, and the song ceased. I cannot sing it any more, he said. That is but a part, for I have forgotten much. It is long and sad, for it tells how sorrow came upon Lothlorien, Lorien of the Blossom, when the dwarves awakened evil in the mountains. But the dwarves did not make the evil, said Gimli. I said not so, yet evil came, answered Legolas sadly. Then many of the elves of Nimrodel's kindred left their dwellings and departed, and she was lost far in the south, in the passes of the White Mountains, and she came not to the ship where Amroth her lover waited her. But in the spring, when the wind is in the new leaves, the echo of her voice may still be heard by the falls that bear her name. And when the wind is in the south, the voice of Amroth comes up from the sea. For Nimrodel flows into Silverlode, the elves call Celebrant, and Celebrant into Anduin the Great, and Anduin flows into the bay of Belfalas, whence the elves of Lorien set sail. But neither Nimrodel nor Amroth came ever back. It is told that she had a house built in the branches of a tree that grew near the falls, for that was the custom of the elves of Lorien, to dwell in the trees, and maybe it is so still. Therefore they were called the Gladrim, the tree people. Deep in their forests the trees are very great. The people of the woods did not delve in the ground like dwarves, nor build strong places of stone before the shadow came. And even in these latter days, dwelling in the trees might be thought safer than sitting on the ground, said Gimli. He looked across the stream to the road that led back to Dimril Dale, and then up again then up into the roof of dark boughs above. Your words bring good counsel, Gimli, said Aragorn. We cannot build a house, but tonight we will do as the Gladrim and seek refuge in the treetops, if we can. We have sat here beside the road already longer than was wise. The company now turned aside from the path and went into the shadow of the deeper woods, westward along the mountain stream, away from Silverlode. Not far from the falls of Nimrodel, they found a cluster of trees, some of which overhung the stream. Their great gray trunks were of mighty girth, but their height could not be guessed. I will climb up, said Legolas. I am at home among trees, by root or bough, though these trees are of a kind strange to me, save as a name and song. Melern, they are called, and are those that bear the yellow blossom, but I have never climbed in one. I will see now what is their shape and way of growth. Sorry, Chad, I gotta take another drink of water. Hope you're enjoying this. Right. Whatever it may be, said Pippin, there will be marvelous trees indeed if they can offer any rest at night, except to birds. I cannot sleep on a perch. "And dig a hole in the ground," said Legolas, "if that is more after the fashion of your kind. But you must dig swift and deep if you wish to hide from orcs." He sprang lightly up from the ground and caught a branch that grew from the trunk high above his head. But even as he swung there for a moment, a voice spoke suddenly from the tree shadows above him. "Darrow," it said in a commanding tone, and Legolas dropped back to the earth in surprise and fear. He shrank against the bole of the tree. "Stand still," he whispered to the others. "Do not move or speak." There was a sound of soft laughter over their heads, and then another clear voice spoken in Elven tongue. Frodo could understand little of what was said, for the speech that the Sylvan folk east of the mountains used among themselves was unlike that of the west. Legolas looked up and answered in the same language. "Who are they, and what are they?" asked Merry. "They are elves," said Sam. "Can't you hear their voices?" "Yes, they are elves," said Legolas, "and they say you breathe so loud they could shoot you in the dark." Sam hastily put his hand over his mouth. "But they say also that you need have no fear. They have been aware of us for a long while. They heard my voice across the Nimrodel, and knew that I was one of their northern kindred, and therefore they did not hinder our crossing. And afterwards they heard my song. Now they bid me climb up with Frodo, for they seem to have some tidings of him and of our journey. The others, they ask, to wait a little, and to keep watch at the foot of the tree until they have decided what is to be done." Out of the shadows a ladder was let down. It was made of rope, silver gray and glimmering in the dark, and though it looked slender, it proved strong enough to bear many men. Legolas ran lightly up, and Frodo followed slowly. Behind came Sam, trying not to breathe loudly. The branches of the Malhorn tree grew out nearly straight from the trunk, and then swept upward, but near the top the main stem divided into a crown of many boughs, and among these they found that there had been built a wooden platform, or a flet, as such things were called in those days. The elves called it a talon. It was reached by a round hole in the center through which the ladder passed. When Frodo came at last up to the flet, he found Legolas seated with three other elves. There they were clad in shadowy gray and could not be seen among the tree stems, unless they moved suddenly. They stood up, and one of them uncovered a small lamp that gave out a slender silver beam. He held it up, looking at Frodo's face and Sam's. Then he shut it off the light again, and spoke words of welcome in his elven tongue. Frodo spoke haltingly in return. "Welcome," the elf then said in common language, speaking slowly. "We seldom use any tongue but our own, for we dwell now in the heart of the forest, and do not willingly have dealings with any other folk. Even our own kindred in the north are sundered from us. But there are some of us still who go abroad for the gathering of news and the watching of our enemies, and they speak the languages of the other lands. I am one. Heldir is my name. My brothers, Rumiel and Orphan, speak little of your tongue. We have heard rumors of your coming, for the messengers of Elrond passed by Lorien on their way home up the Dimmeril Stair. We had not heard of hobbits, of halflings for many a long year, and did not know that any yet dwelt in Middle-earth. You do not look evil, and since you come with an elf of our kindred, we are willing to befriend you, as Elrond asked, though it is not our custom to lead strangers through our land. But you must stay here tonight. How many are you?" "8," said Legolas, "myself, 4 hobbits, and 2 men, one of whom, Aragorn, is an elf friend of the folk of Westernese." "The name of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, is known in Lorien," said Heldir, "and he is the favor of the lady. All then is well, but you have yet only spoken of 7. The 8th is a dwarf," said Legolas. "A dwarf," said Heldir. "That is not well. We have not had dealings with the dwarves since the dark days. They are not permitted in our land. I cannot allow him to pass." "But he is from the Lonely Mountain, one of Dane's trusty people, and friendly to Elrond," said Frodo. "Elrond himself chose him to be one of our companions, and he has been brave and faithful." The elves spoke together in soft voices, and questioned Legolas in their own tongue. "Very good," said Haldir at last. "We will do this, though it is against our liking. If Aragorn and Legolas will guard him, and answer for him, he shall pass. But he must go blindfold through Lothlorien. But now we must debate no longer. Your folk must not remain on the ground. We have been keeping watch on the rivers ever since we saw a great troop of orcs going north towards Moria, along the skirts of the mountains many days ago. Wolves are howling on the wood's borders. If you have indeed come from Moria, the peril cannot be far behind. Tomorrow early you must go on. The 4 hobbits shall climb up here and stay with us. We do not fear them. There is another Talon in the next tree. There the others must take refuge. You, Legolas, must answer to us for them." Call us if anything is amiss, and have an eye on that dwarf. Legolas went down the ladder to take Heldir's message, and soon afterwards Merry and Pippin clambered up on the high flat. They were out of breath and seemed rather scared. There, said Merry, panting, we have looked up your blankets as well as our own. Strider has hidden all the rest of our baggage in a deep drift of leaves. You had no need of your burden, said Heldir. It is cold in the treetops in winter, though the wind tonight is in the south. We have food and drink to give you that will drive away the night chill, and we have skins and cloaks to spare. The hobbits accepted this second, and far better supper very gladly. Then they wrapped themselves warmly, not only in the fur cloaks of the elves, but in their own blankets as well, and tried to go to sleep. But weary as they were, only Sam found that easy to do. Hobbits do not like heights, and do not sleep upstairs, even when they have any stairs. The flat was not at all to their liking as a bedroom. It had no walls, not even a rail, only on one side was there a light-plated screen, which could be moved and fixed in different places according to the wind. Pippin went on talking for a while. I hope if I do go to sleep in this bird loft that I shan't roll off, he said. Once I do get to sleep, said Sam, I shall go on sleeping whether I roll off or no. And the less said, the sooner I'll drop off, if you take my meaning. Frodo lay for some time awake, and looked up at the stars glinting through the pale roof of quivering leaves. Sam was snoring at his side long before he himself closed his eyes. He could dimly see the gray forms of two elves sitting motionless with their arms about their knees, speaking in whispers. Sorry. The other had gone down to take up his watch on one of the lower branches. At last, lulled by the wind in the boughs above and the sweet murmur of the falls of Nimrodel below, Frodo fell asleep with the song of Legolas running in his mind. Late in the night he woke. The other hobbits were asleep. The elves were gone. The sickle moon was gleaming dimly among the leaves. The wind was still. A little way off he heard a harsh laugh and the tread of many feet on the ground below. There was a ring of metal. The sounds died slowly away and seemed to go southward, on into the wood. A hand appeared suddenly through the hole in the flet. Frodo sat up in alarm and saw that there was a gray-hooded elf. He looked towards the hobbits. What is it? Said Frodo. Yurch, said the elf in a hissing whisper, and cast on the flet the rope ladder rolled up. Wark, said Frodo. What are they doing? But the elf had gone. There were no more sounds. Even the leaves were silent, and the very falls seemed to be hushed. Frodo sat and shivered in his wraps. He was thankful that he had not been caught on the ground, but he felt that the trees offered little protection, except concealment. Orcs were as keen as hounds on the scent, it was said, but they could also climb. He drew out Sting. It flashed and glittered like blue flames, and then slowly faded again and grew dull. In spite of the fading of his sword, the feeling of immediate danger did not leave Frodo. Rather, it grew stronger. He got up and crawled to the opening and peered down. He was almost certain that he could hear stealthy movements at the tree's foot far below. Not elves, for woodland folk were altogether noiseless in their movements. Then he heard faintly a sound of like sniffing, and something seemed to be scrabbling on the bark of the tree trunk. He stared down into the dark, holding his breath. Something was now climbing slowly, and its breath came like a soft hissing through the closed teeth. Then, coming up close to the stem, Frodo saw two pale eyes. They stopped and gazed upward unwinking. Suddenly they turned away, and a shadowy figure slipped around the trunk of the tree and vanished. Immediately afterwards, Heldir came climbing swiftly up through the branches. There was something in this tree that I have never seen before, he said. It was not an orc. It fled as soon as I touched the tree stem. It seemed to be weary, and to have all skills in trees, or I might have thought that it was one of you hobbits. I did not shoot, for I dared not arouse any cries. We cannot risk battle. A strong company of orcs have passed. They crossed the Nimrodel, cursed their foul feet in its clean water, and went on down the old road beside the river. They seemed to pick up some scent, and they searched the ground for a while near the place where you had halted. The three of us could not challenge 100, so we went ahead and spoke with feigned voices, leading them onto the wood. Orofin has now gone in haste back to the dwellings to warn our people. None of the orcs will ever return out of Lorien, and there will be many elves hidden in the northern border before another night falls. But you must take the road south as soon as it is fully light. Day came pale from the east. As the light grew, it filtered through the yellow leaves of the Melorn, and it seemed to the hobbits that the early sun of cool summer's morning was shining. Pale blue sky peeped among the moving branches. Looking through an opening on the south side of the flet, Frodo saw all the valley of the Silverlode, laying like a sea of ballowed gold tossing gently in the breeze. The morning was still young and cold when the company set out again, guided by Haldir and his brother Rumiel. "Farewell, sweet Nimrodel," cried Legolas. Frodo looked back and caught a gleam of white foam among the gray tree stems. "Farewell," he said. It seemed to him that he would never hear again of running water so beautiful, forever blending in its innumerable notes in an endless changeful music. They went back to the path they still went on along the west side of the Silver Lode, and for some way they followed them southward. There were the prints of orc feet in the earth. But soon Haldir turned aside into the trees and halted on the bank of the river under their shadows. "There is one of my people yonder across the stream," he said, though you may not see him. He gave a call like the low whistle of a bird, and out of a thicket of young trees an elf stepped, clad in gray, but with his hood thrown back, his hair glinted like gold in the morning sun. Haldir skillfully cast over the stream a coil of gray rope. He caught it and bound the end about a tree near the bank. "Telebrant is already a strong stream here, as you see," said Haldir, "and it runs both swift and deep, and is very cold. We do not set foot in it so far north unless we must. But in these days of watchfulness, we do not make bridges. That is how we cross. Follow me." He made his end of the rope fast about another tree, and then ran lightly along it over the river and back again, as if he were on a road. "I can walk this path," said Legolas, "but the others have not this skill. Must they swim?" "No," said Haldir. "We have 2 more ropes. We will fasten them above the other, one shoulder high, sorry, and another half high, and holding these, the strangers should be able to cross with care." When the slender bridge had been made, the company passed over, some cautiously and slowly, others more easily. Of the hobbits, Pippin proved the best, for he was sure-footed, and he walked over quickly, holding only with his one hand. But he kept his eyes on the bank ahead and did not look down. Sam shuffled along, clutching hard, and looking down into the pale eddying waters as if it were a chasm in the mountains. He breathed with relief when he was safely across. "Live and learn," as my gaffer used to say, though he was thinking of gardening, not of roosting like a bird, nor of trying to walk like a spider. Not even my uncle, Andy, ever did a trick like that. When at length the company was gathered on the east bank of the Silver Lode, the elves untied the ropes and coiled the 2 of them. Rumiel, who had remained on the other side, drew back the last one, slung it on his shoulder, and with a wave of his hand, went away back to Nimrodel to keep watch. Again, welcome everyone. "Now, friends," said Haldir, "you have entered the Nath of Lorien, or the Gore, as you would say, for it is the land that lies like a spearhead between the arms of Silverlode and Anduin the Great. We allow no strangers to spy out the secrets of the Nath. Few indeed are permitted even to set foot there. As was agreed, I shall here blindfold the eyes of Gimli the dwarf. The others may walk free for a while until we come nearer to our dwellings, down in Agladil, in the angle between the waters." Sorry. Dry throat. This was not at all to the liking of Gimli. "The agreement was made without my consent," he said. "I will not walk blindfold like a beggar or a prisoner, and I am no spy. My folk have never had dealings with any of the servants of the enemy. Neither have we done harm to the elves. I am no more likely to betray you than Legolas, or any other of my companions." "I do not doubt you," said Haldir. "Yet this is our law. I am not the master of the law, and cannot set it aside. I have done much in letting you set foot over Telebrant." Gimli was obstinate. He planted his feet firmly apart, and laid his hand upon the shaft of his half of his axe. "I will go forward free," he said, "or I will go back and seek my own land, where I am known to be true of word, though I perish alone in the wilderness." "You cannot go back," said Haldir sternly. "Now you have come thus far, you must be brought before the Lord and the Lady. They shall judge you, to hold you or to give you leave, as they will. You cannot cross the rivers again, and behind you there are now secret sentinels that you cannot pass. You would be slain before you saw them." Gimli drew his axe from his belt. Haldir and his companions bent their bows. "A plague on dwarves and their stiff necks," said Legolas. "Come," said Aragorn. "If I am still to lead this company, you must do as I bid. It is hard upon the dwarf to be thus singled out. We will all be blindfold, even Legolas. That would be best, though it would make the journey slow and dull." Gimli laughed suddenly. "A merry troop of fools we shall look. Will Haldir lead us all on a string, like many blind beggars with one dog? But I will be content, if only Legolas here shares my blindness." "I am an elf and a kinsman here," said Legolas, becoming angry in his turn. "Now let us cry, a plague on the stiff necks of elves," said Aragorn. but the company shall all fare alike. Come, bind our eyes, Haldir. I shall claim full amends for every fall and stub-toe if you do not lead us well, said Gimli as they bound a cloth about his eyes. You will have no claim, said Haldir. I shall lead you well, and the paths are smooth and straight. Alas for the folly of these days, said Legolas. Here are all the enemies of the one enemy, yet I must walk blind, while the sun is in the merry of in the woodland, under leaves of gold. Folly it may seem, said Haldir. Indeed, in nothing is the power of the Dark Lord more clearly shown than the estrangement that divides all those who still oppose him. Yet so little faith and trust do we find now in the world beyond Lothlorien, unless maybe in Rivendell, that we dare not by our own trust endanger our land. We live now upon an island amid many perils, and our hands are more often upon the bowstring than any upon the harp. The rivers long defend us, but they are a sure guard no more. The shadow has crept northward all about us. Some speak of departing, yet for that it already seems too late. The mountains to the west are growing evil. To the east, the lands are waste, and full of Sauron's creatures, and it is rumored that we cannot now safely pass southward through Rohan, and the mouths of the great river are watched by the enemy. Even if we could come to the shores of the sea, we should find no longer any shelter there. It is said that there are still havens of the High Elves, but they are far north and west, beyond the land of the Halflings. But where that may be, though the Lord and Lady may know, I do not. You ought at least to guess, since you have seen us, said Merry. There are elf havens west of my land, the Shire, where hobbits live. Happy folk are hobbits to dwell near the shores of the sea, said Haldir. It is long indeed since any of my folk have looked on it, yet still we remember it in its song. Tell me of these havens as we walk. I cannot, said Merry. I have never seen them. I have never been out of my own land before, and if I had known what the world outside was like, I don't think I should have had the heart to leave it. Not even to see the fair Lothlorien, said Haldir. The world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places, but still there is much that is fair, and though in all lands love is now mingled with the grief, it grows perhaps the greater. Some there are among us who sing that the shadow will draw back and peace will come again. Yet I do not believe that the world about us will ever again be as it was of old, or the light of the sun as it was aforetime. For the elves, I fear, will prove at best a truce, in which they may pass to the sea unhindered and leave Middle-earth forever. Alas for Lothlorien that I love. It would be a poor life in a land where no Malorn grew. But if there are Malorn trees beyond the great sea, none ever ported it. And as they spoke thus, the company filed slowly along the paths in the woods, led by Haldir, while the other elf walked behind. They felt the ground beneath their feet smooth and soft, and after a while they walked more freely, without fear of hurt or fall. Being deprived of sight, Frodo found his hearing and other senses sharpened. He could smell the trees and the trodden grass. He could hear many different notes in the rustle of the leaves overhead, the river murmuring away on his right, and the thin, clear voices of birds high in the sky. He felt the sun upon his face. He felt the sun upon his face and hands when they passed through the open glade. As soon as he set foot upon the far bank of the Silver Lode, a strange feeling had come upon him, and it deepened as he walked on into the Nath. It seemed to him that he had stepped over a bridge of time into a corner of the elder days, and was now walking in a world that was no more. In Rivendell there was a memory of ancient things. In Lorien, the ancient things still lived on in the waking world. Evil had been seen and heard there, sorrow had been known. The elves feared and distrusted the world outside. Wolves were howling on the wood's borders, but on the land of Lorien no shadow lay. All that day the company marched on until they felt the cool evening come and heard the early night wind whispering among many leaves. Then they rested and slept without fear upon the ground, for their guides would not permit them to unbind their eyes, and they could not climb. In the morning they went on again, walking without haste. At noon they halted, and Frodo was aware they had passed out under the shining sun. Suddenly he heard the sound of many voices all around him. A marching host of elves had come up silently. They were hastening towards the northern borders to guard against any attack from Moria, and they brought news, some of which Haldir reported. The marauding orcs had been waylaid and almost all destroyed. The remnant had fled westward towards the mountains and were being pursued. A strange creature had also been seen, running with bent back and with hands near the ground, like a beast and yet not of beast shape. It had eluded capture, and they had not shot at it, not knowing whether it was good or ill. and they had vanished down the Silver Lode southward. Can you guess who that is? Also, said Haldir, they bring me a message from the Lord and Lady of the Galadrim. You are all to walk free, even the dwarf Gimli. It seems the lady knows who and what each member of your company. New messages have come from Rivendell, perhaps. He removed the bandage first from Gimli's eyes. Your pardon, he said, bowing low. Look on us now with friendly eyes. Look and be glad, for you are the first dwarf to behold the trees of the Nath of Lorien since Durin's day. Oh, shut up, Gravy. When his eyes were in turn uncovered, Frodo looked up and caught his breath. They were standing in an open space. To the left stood a great mound covered with a sward of grass as green as springtime in the elder days. Upon it, as a double crown, grew 2 circles of trees. The outer had bark of snowy white, and were leafless but beautiful in their shapely nakedness. The inner were malorn trees of great height, still arrayed in pale gold. High amid the branches of a towering tree that stood in the center of all, there gleamed a white flet. At the feet of the trees, and all about the green hillsides, the grass was studded with small golden flowers shaped like stars. Among them, nodding on slender stalks, were other flowers, white and palest green. They glimmered as a mist amid the rich hue of the grass. Over all the sky was blue, and the sun of afternoon glowed upon the hill and cast long green shadows beneath the trees. Behold, you are come to the Cederan Amroth, said Haldir, for this is the heart of the ancient realm, as it was long ago. And here is the mound of Amroth, where in happier days his high house was built. Here ever bloom the winter flowers and the unfading grass, the yellow Eleanor and the pale Nifredil. Here we will stay a while and come to the city of Galadrim at dusk. The others cast themselves down upon the fragrant grass, but Frodo stood while, still lost in wonder. It seemed to him that he had stepped through a high window that looked on a vanished world. A light was upon it for which his language had no name. All that he saw was shapely, but the shapes seemed at once clear-cut, as if they had been first conceived and drawn at the uncovering of his eyes, and ancient as if they had endured forever. He saw no color, but those he knew, gold and white and blue and green, but they were fresh and poignant, as if he had at that moment first perceived them and made for them names new and wonderful. In winter here no heart could mourn for summer or for spring. No blemish or sickness or deformity could be seen in anything that grew upon the earth. On the land of Lorien there was no stain. He turned and saw that Sam was now standing beside him, looking round with a puzzled expression and rubbing his eyes as if he was not sure that he was awake. It's sunlight and bright day, right enough, he said. I thought the elves were all for moon and stars, but this is more elvish than anything I've heard tell of. I feel as if I was inside a song, if you take my meaning. Haldir looked at them, and he seemed indeed to take the meaning of both thought and word. He smiled. You feel the power of the Lady of the Galadrim, he said. Would it please you to climb with me up the Cederan Amroth? He followed him as he stepped lightly up the grass-clad slopes. Though he walked and breathed, and about him living leaves and flowers were stirred by the same cool wind as fanned his face, Frodo felt that he was in a timeless land that did not fade or change or fall into forgetfulness. When he had gone and passed again into the outer world, still Frodo, the wanderer from the Shire, would walk there, upon the grass among Eleanor and Nifredil, and fair Lothlorien. They entered the circle of white trees. As they did so, the south wind blew upon Cederan Amroth, and sighed among the branches. Frodo stood still, hearing far off great seas upon beaches that had long ago been washed away, and seabirds crying whose race had perished from the earth. Haldir had gone on and was now climbing to the high flet. As Frodo prepared to follow him, he laid his hand upon the tree beside the ladder. Never before had he been so suddenly and so keenly aware of the feel and the texture of a tree's skin, and of the life within it. He felt a delight in wood and the touch of it, neither as forester nor as carpenter. It was the delight of the living tree itself. As he stepped out and at last upon the lofty platform, Haldir took his hand and turned him towards the south. Look this way first, he said. Frodo looked and saw, still at some distance, a hill of many mighty trees, or a city of green towers, which it was he could not tell. Out of it seemed to him that the power and light came that held all the land in sway. He longed suddenly to fly like a bird to rest in the green city. Then he looked to eastward and saw all the land of Lorien running down into the pale gleam of Anduin, the great river. He lifted his eyes across the river, and all the light went out, and he was back again in the world he knew. Beyond the river, the land appeared flat and empty, formless and vague, until far away it rose again like a wall, dark and dreary. The sun that lay on Lothlorien had no power to enlighten the shadow of that distant height. There lies the fastness of southern Mirkwood, said Haldir. It is clad in a forest of dark fir, where the trees strive one against another, and their branches rot and wither. In the midst upon the stony height stands Dol Guldur, where along the hidden enemy had his dwelling. We fear that now it is inhabited again, and with power sevenfold. A black cloud lies often over it of late. In this high place you may see the two powers that are opposed one to another, and ever they strive now in thought. But whereas one to another, but whereas the light perceives the very heart of the darkness, its own secret has not been discovered, not yet. They turned and climbed swiftly down, and they followed him. At the hill's foot, Frodo found Aragorn, standing still and silent as a tree. But in his hand was a small golden bloom of Elenor, and a light was in his eyes. He was wrapped in some fair memory, and as Frodo looked at him, he knew that he had beheld things as they once had been in the same place. For the grim years were removed from the face of Aragorn, and he seemed clothed in white, a young lord tall and fair, and he spoke words in the Elvish tongue to one whom Frodo could not see. Arwen Venimedel Namariel, he said, and then he drew a breath, and returning out of his thoughts, he looked at Frodo and smiled. Here is the heart of Elvendom on earth, he said, and here my heart dwells ever, unless there be a light beyond the dark roads that we still must tread, you and I. Come with me, and taking Frodo's hand in his, he left the hill of Caron Amroth, and came there never again as a living man. And that is where we pause, ladies and gentlemen, because we will be meeting the Lord and Lady of the Woods in the coming chapters. So, I appreciate you all hanging out with me. Went a little bit longer than I anticipated reading 2 chapters, but it is what it is. So, I will try to do a reading stream, as I said, Thursday. Might only be 1 chapter, depending on when I'm able to start the stream. But tomorrow, it'll either be Worldwide Weird or Top 10. I won't know for sure until I hear from my co-host, because he's 6 hours ahead of me, and his sleep schedule is a little bit iffy right now. So if he's unable to do the Top 10, I'll do the Worldwide Weird by myself tomorrow. And then do the reading stream Thursday. And I'm planning a gaming stream Friday, because Saturday I will be busy for most of the day and into the evening, because I will be hanging out with my siblings about mid to late afternoon into the evening. So no stream at all Saturday. And then Talk Nerdy to Us, which I do with my nerdy home, would be on her channel. It should be happening this coming Sunday. So tune into that we switched, and I'll be doing the drunk St. Patty's Day stream the following week on my channel. So you want to know how tall I am? Metal Mania, would you believe I'm only a little over 5 foot tall? I am short. I'm about the size of a dwarf. I'm about the size of one of Tolkien's dwarves. If I were that tall, Gravy, I'd be, at the very least, Numenorian. They are tall. So yes, I'm only about 5 foot 2 inches. So, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out with me. I will see you all tomorrow, again, on my YouTube channel. Either for, again, Worldwide Weird, or the top 10 1997 films, our own personal top 10 lists. Now, you can believe what you want. I'm short in height, but I guess tall in personality. I don't know how that works, but there it is. Anyway, good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you all tomorrow evening. Take care, stay safe, and have a good rest of your day or evening wherever you are in the world.